Lady Evelyn Ashcombe learned of her engagement the same way one learns of bad weather, quietly, without warning, and far too late to escape it. The letter arrived during breakfast, placed beside her untouched tea by a trembling servant who refused to meet her eyes. Her father remained at the head of the table, calmly buttering bread while rain struck the tall windows of Ashcombe Hall. "You are to marry the Duke of Ravenshire," he said without emotion. "The arrangements have already been accepted." For a moment, Evelyn simply stared at him. The words settled slowly like snow covering a grave. The Duke of Ravenshire. Even in London, where gossip traveled faster than carriages, people spoke his name carefully. Adrian Laurent, Duke of Ravenshire, was wealthy, powerful, and impossibly distant. A man known more for silence than kindness. He attended royal events without smiling, danced only when required, and left conversations before they truly began. Some women admired him. Most feared him. Evelyn had never met him. "I was not asked," she whispered. Her father finally looked at her then, though not with cruelty, only exhaustion. "You were chosen." That hurt far more. 3 weeks later, Evelyn stood beneath the towering ceilings of Ravenshire Manor, feeling less like a bride and more like a carefully delivered possession. The wedding itself passed in a blur of candlelight and whispers. Noblewomen studied her gown, men measured her dowry with their eyes, no one cared whether she was happy. And the Duke? He barely looked at her. When he placed the wedding ring upon her finger, his touch was steady but cold. His voice remained low during the vows, perfectly controlled, as though emotion itself was improper. Only once did their eyes truly meet. And in that brief moment, Evelyn saw something unexpected. Not arrogance. Loneliness. But it vanished too quickly to understand. That evening, Ravenshire Manor swallowed her whole. The estate was magnificent in the cruelest way possible. Endless corridors, marble fireplaces, portraits of stern ancestors starring from dark walls. Everything was beautiful, yet nothing felt warm. Even the servants moved carefully around the Duke, as though afraid of disturbing some invisible storm. Evelyn soon learned his habits. He rose before dawn, worked for hours in his study, spoke little during meals, disappeared on horseback whenever guests arrived. At first she blamed herself. Perhaps she was disappointing, too quiet, too plain, too unfamiliar with the rigid elegance expected of a duchess. So she tried harder. She attended every social event beside him, learned the names of his political acquaintances, memorized the preferences of noblewomen who secretly mocked her country upbringing. Still, Adrian remained distant. One evening during a grand dinner party, Evelyn made the mistake of laughing too loudly at a guest's story. The sound escaped before she could stop it. The table fell silent. Not because laughter was forbidden, but because the Duke slowly lowered his wine glass and looked at her with cold restraint. "You need not draw attention to yourself so eagerly," he said quietly. The humiliation struck instantly. Several women exchanged glances behind jeweled fans. Evelyn felt heat rise to her face. "I apologize." Adrian said nothing more. But the damage had already settled into the room. That night she cried silently after the candles were extinguished, careful not to let him hear. Yet beside her in the darkness, the Duke remained awake far longer than usual. Winter deepened around Ravenshire Manor. Snow covered the gardens, frost climbed the windows each morning, the distance between husband and wife grew colder still. But loneliness has a dangerous way of sharpening the heart. Evelyn began noticing things others ignored. The Duke never allowed musicians to play after midnight. He avoided the West Wing entirely. And every year on the same December evening, he locked himself inside his late mother's old greenhouse until dawn. Curiosity eventually overcame caution. One snowy night, Evelyn followed him. The greenhouse stood hidden behind the frozen gardens, glowing faintly with candlelight. Inside, Adrian sat alone among dead vines and sleeping roses, staring at an old painting resting against the wall. His mother, beautiful, gentle-eyed, gone many years now. "You should not be here," he said without turning. Evelyn hesitated, then why leave the door unlocked? Silence filled the greenhouse. Finally, Adrian spoke again. "She died here." The words carried no dramatic sorrow, only exhaustion worn smooth by time. She loved this place, he continued quietly. The winter she became ill, she insisted the flowers would bloom again before spring. Evelyn stepped closer carefully. They did not. She never saw them. For the first time since their marriage, his voice cracked slightly. And suddenly the cold Duke no longer seemed untouchable. Only wounded. Evelyn sat beside him without permission. Neither spoke for several minutes. Snow tapped softly against the glass roof overhead. She would have liked you, Adrian said eventually. The words startled her more than any compliment could have. But the moment passed quickly. The next morning he became distant once again. As though vulnerability itself embarrassed him. Weeks later, London's social season began, bringing endless balls and gatherings. At first Evelyn dreaded them. Then something unexpected happened. People began noticing her. Not merely as Ravenshire's quiet duchess, but as herself. She spoke elegantly, danced beautifully, listened with intelligence others found refreshing in rooms filled with vanity. Gentlemen saw her attention. Ladies copied her gowns. Even older noblewomen began praising her grace openly. And for the first time in months, Evelyn stopped chasing her husband's approval. She smiled without checking whether he approved. Spoke freely without fear. Laughed when something was genuinely amusing. The change unsettled Adrian far more than he expected. Especially when Lord Whitmore returned to London. Christopher Whitmore was charming in the effortless way warm men often are. He and Evelyn had known one another briefly years before her marriage. Unlike Adrian, Christopher spoke easily. He complimented Evelyn openly. Danced with her often. And worst of all, he made her laugh. One evening during a royal gathering, Adrian watched from across the ballroom as Evelyn smiled at Whitmore beneath golden chandeliers. Something sharp twisted unexpectedly inside his chest. Jealousy. He hated it instantly. Yet he could not look away. "You are staring at your wife rather intensely," an older duchess remarked with amusement. Adrian turned cold immediately. I was unaware observation required permission. But the woman merely smiled knowingly. Later that night, Adrian found Evelyn alone on a balcony overlooking the snowy gardens below. "You danced 3 times with Whitmore," he said. Evelyn blinked softly. "Did you count them?" The question caught him off guard. For once she did not sound timid. She sounded tired. "I simply noticed," he replied. "And I noticed," Evelyn said quietly, "that my husband has barely spoken 10 kind words to me since our wedding." The winter air sharpened between them. "You have everything you could desire here." Her expression changed then. Not angry. Heartbroken. Everything except affection. Adrian looked away first. That realization disturbed him deeply. After that evening, Evelyn slowly withdrew from him. Not dramatically. Not cruelly. She simply stopped hopping. And somehow, that hurt Adrian more than any argument could have. She no longer waited for him at dinner. No longer sought his opinion before social events. No longer looked disappointed when he left the room. The absence of her attention became unbearable. One rainy afternoon, Adrian returned unexpectedly early from London and found the manor strangely quiet. "Where is the Duchess?" he asked. The servant hesitated. "She rode to Briarwood Cottage, Your Grace." "Alone?" "Yes, Your Grace." Adrian immediately ordered his horse prepared. Briarwood Cottage rested near the cliffs bordering the estate. Evelyn had discovered the abandoned cottage weeks earlier and often visited to escape the suffocating expectations of noble life. When Adrian arrived, he found her standing near the edge of the cliffs beneath dark clouds rolling across the sea. Wind pulled strands of hair loose from beneath her hood. She looked peaceful and heartbreakingly distant. "You should not come here alone," he said as he approached. Evelyn smiled faintly. "You sound concerned." "I am." The honesty escaped before he could stop it. She turned toward him slowly. "Why?" Adrian opened his mouth. Nothing came. Because the truth frightened him. Because somewhere between quiet dinners and painful silences, between jealousy and regret, he had fallen deeply in love with his own wife. And he did not know how to say it. Evelyn looked away again. "That is the difficulty with cold men, your grace," she murmured. "By the time they learn warmth, others have already frozen waiting." The words lingered long after she walked back toward the cottage. That night, Adrian did not sleep at all. Memories tormented him instead. Evelyn laughing nervously during their first dinner. Evelyn sitting beside him in the greenhouse. Evelyn looking wounded after every careless remark. And worst of all, Evelyn slowly learning not to need him. For the first time in years, Adrian felt powerless. Days later, disaster nearly struck. During a crowded charity event in London, a sudden fire broke out in one wing of the estate hosting the gathering. Panic spread instantly through smoke-filled halls as guests rushed toward exits. Adrian searched desperately through the chaos. Then he saw her. Evelyn stood trapped near a fallen beam while frightened guests pushed past without helping. Adrian reached her in seconds. "Come with me." Smoke thickened rapidly overhead. "The corridor is blocked," Evelyn coughed. Without hesitation, Adrian removed his coat, shielding her as he guided her through another passageway toward safety. A burning beam crashed nearby. Evelyn stumbled. Adrian caught her instantly against his chest. For one terrifying moment, he realized exactly what losing her would feel like. Unbearable. They escaped into the rain moments later. Outside, trembling guests gathered beneath carriages and umbrellas while servants rushed everywhere in confusion. But Adrian noticed none of it. His hands remained tightly around Evelyn's face as rain soaked them both. "Are you hurt?" "No." He closed his eyes briefly with relief so visible it startled her. And suddenly she understood. This was not duty. Not obligation. Fear lived in his expression. Real fear. That evening, back at Ravenshire Manor, silence settled softly between them beside the fireplace. Finally, Adrian spoke. "When I was young, my father loved my mother fiercely. After she died, he became cruel to everyone around him, especially me." Evelyn listened quietly. "I spent years believing attachment only creates weakness, loss, pain," his voice lowered further, "so I convinced myself distance was safer." Evelyn's eyes softened. "And now?" Adrian looked at her fully then, truly fully, perhaps for the first time. "Now I think I have been a coward." Emotion tightened painfully in her chest. "You hurt me," she whispered. "I know. You made me feel unwanted." His expression darkened with regret. "I wanted you from the moment I first saw you walking down that cathedral aisle." Evelyn stared at him silently. "But wanting something," Adrian continued softly, "and knowing how to love it properly are very different things." The fire crackled gently nearby. Outside, rain touched the windows. "I do not deserve forgiveness easily," he said, "but if there is still even the smallest place for me in your heart, I would spend the rest of my life earning it." Tears filled Evelyn's eyes before she could stop them. Because despite everything, she still loved him. Perhaps she always had. Adrian stepped closer carefully, as though approaching something fragile. "I do not know how to become a different man overnight," he admitted, "but I know this: the thought of losing you terrifies me more than anything I have ever faced." Evelyn searched his face. No walls remained now. Only honesty. Slowly she reached for his hand. And for the first time since their marriage, Adrian held her not with restraint, but with tenderness. Winter eventually gave way to spring. The frozen gardens of Ravenshire Manor bloomed once more beneath warm sunlight. Roses climbed the greenhouse walls again, just as Adrian's mother once hoped they would. And something within the manor changed too. The servants noticed it first. The Duke smiled more. The Duchess laughed freely. Dinner conversations lasted longer. Music returned to the halls after midnight. One evening months later, Evelyn wandered into the greenhouse and found Adrian standing beside newly blossomed roses. "You restored it," she said softly. "No," he replied, watching her with warmth no one else had ever truly seen before. "You did." She smiled then. Not the careful smile of a nervous bride. Not the lonely smile of a neglected wife. But the smile of a woman finally loved openly. Adrian crossed the room slowly before resting his forehead gently against hers. "I spent so long fearing loss," he whispered, "that I nearly lost the greatest thing I was ever given." Evelyn touched his cheek softly. And now, he said, I intend to love you loudly enough that you never question it again. Outside, spring rain began falling lightly over Ravenshire Manor. Inside the greenhouse, surrounded by blooming flowers and fatting candlelight, the lonely Duke finally learned that love was never the weakness he feared. It was the only thing powerful enough to thaw a frozen heart.